Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick, with the City of Hampton's Communication Department. And today we're going to talk about pets, most specifically dogs, but it's an emotional issue that's been before the City Council for a while, and that is the chaining or tethering of dogs in the yard. My guest today is Assistant City Manager Jimmy Gray. Welcome, Jimmy.
Okay, good morning. Well, thanks for having me.
You've been working on this for a long time.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I looked back over it a couple of days ago, and it's probably been about a year when Peter asked the City of Hampton to look at the issue of tethering and of dogs in the City of Hampton, and we've been working very close with our Animal Control Advisory Committee and staff to try to bring at least some resolution to this issue, because we thought that what they brought to our attention about animals being permanently chained and in the backyard, neglected, and not properly taken care of was something that we should address as a city.
So we've come up with a couple of different proposals. It's a back and forth. We've gathered information. But let's talk first about the issue of chaining animals. Why has this come about? I mean, I noticed that Norfolk and Virginia Beach have put limits on tethering. It is a little bit of a trend, and there's some body of research, but also just some emotion attached to this.
There is, and really there are two reasons. One, that dogs who are permanently chained or tethered to trees and posts, and who live a life of existence in the backyard, sometimes not properly sheltered, is one issue that needs to be addressed, so that you make sure that animals and pets, people who have pets, take care of them in a responsible manner. But I think the other half of it is that Peter and some of the other experts in this area had really demonstrated that permanent tethering of animals also leads to aggressiveness, and we have looked at several cases where animals who had or dogs who had been involved in attacks on adults and kids were a result of aggressiveness that was really generated by being attached and permanently attached or chained and tethered in yards. And so we thought for those reasons it was something that we should take a look at. And
this isn't really just coming from PETA. I mean, they may have brought the official request, and some people may consider them a little bit of a fringe group, but it's the Humane Society and the SPCAs and a lot of people in the community who were sort of behind the city taking some stand on this issue.
Absolutely, and again, Peter just raised the issue for us here in Hampton, but really the members of our Animal Control Advisory Committee who are animal advocates and animal lovers from all areas. They're not just dogs, they're cats, they're birds, and so forth. And so they thought that once we provided the information to them, they really thought that this was something that concerned them as well as a large number of other citizens in Hampton. And so we decided to at least make some recommendations on how we can make some improvements in that area, as a result of conversations and discussions with our Animal Control Advisory Committee.
Right. So the first recommendation was to look at a time limit.
That was, because we initially thought that we looked at what was done in some other cities. In the Hampton Roads region, there were some other cities that had some time restrictions, like no more than 3 hours per day. And so we looked at, well, how could we address the issue of tethering, but yet allow for some responsible tethering by people. For example, if you're out, washing the car or doing some other yard activities, and you bring the dog out and want to tether it to a post and properly do that was okay. And then there were some who thought, well, because I work, my dog needs to go out, I need to leave the dog out in the backyard because he or she can't stay in the house, then there's another reason for tethering. So we wanted to, one, look at how we could eliminate the 24/7 tethering in the backyard, but yet allow responsible pet owners to do it, for short periods of times. And so we looked at several time restrictions, 8 hours, 3 hours, and eventually the recommendation from staff was that we look at just a ban on tethering except during sunrise to sunset. But at the end
of the Equally, the time limits have been difficult to prove because.
Right.
You want to explain that?
They are, and they're difficult to enforce because, for example, the 3-hour time limit would require an animal control officer to either stake out or observe an animal being tethered for longer than a 3-hour period, and that was somewhat difficult to enforce. And
right,
so,
because that owner could go to court and say, no, I let the animal in the middle of that time period.
That's
so
correct.
That was one of the reasons your group moved away from that kind of a recommendation.
Yeah, and even those localities that had the 3-hour restriction in place, it had really let us know that that one was somewhat difficult for them to enforce. And so we wanted to find something that was enforceable, but yet still served the purpose of eliminating the 24/7 tethering that occurs.
And that's why the mid-range recommendation that was no tethering at night and with this permit option that would give animal control the ability to inspect the conditions and educate the dog owners and do some sort of process that would ensure better conditions.
That's correct. The permit option was really not so much to gain a fee or some financial benefit to the city. Really, it was just an opportunity to acknowledge who, or at least find out through the permit and the registration process, who is actually tethering their dogs, and then our animal control officers could actually go out, visit with that pet owner, talk about or educate them on the best way to tether and to make sure they had the proper equipment, shelter, etc. So it was an educational opportunity, but the purpose for the permit was really to allow us to know who's actually tethering, and so it wasn't really so much to gauge.
And the cost was to pay for the administration and the visits and stuff. But council said, you know what, that's bureaucratic and complicated, and if the goal is to eliminate tethering, boom, let's do it.
And that's true, and that's what they decided last night, that we would have a total ban on tethering, which was certainly pleasing to those who really were pushing for a total elimination. And as as a part of what we've done over the last several months in trying to get community input, our citizens were split on this. Some of them said that we should have a total ban, and others were okay with some tethering but a restricted time period. And so what council decided last night was that we would do a total ban on tethering in Hampton, which would go into effect in January 1st, 2013. So that gives those people who currently have their dogs tied in the backyard will have to make some other provisions for taking care of their pets.
They will, and I want to talk about that in a second. But to recap the results of that survey, and I will say, my department did that survey, and we very carefully put it online for a very short time period, because the longer something like that is online, the more people forward it to friends across the country and interest groups. And we didn't want to be influenced heavily by people around the country. This was what Hampton residents thought. And so while the survey was up, there were 2,000 people that answered it, and 1,000 of those were from Hampton, but the results were roughly parallel. I mean, it was 60% thought there should be no tethering at all, and only 7% thought the current rule, which is you can tether as long as you want, and there are some restrictions. We should add that right now, that animals have to have food, shelter, water, adequate length of chain not too heavy for the dog. I mean, there are rules to prevent outright mistreatment.
Right, and that's correct. I mean, even if a dog is not tethered, a owner still has to provide adequate food, shelter, and water. So even if you keep your dog in the backyard in a fenced-in area, you still have to provide proper care for the animal. So, really, the tethering was just one issue that we were trying to address. But our animal control officers are out in the community, on a daily basis, making sure, through some of the complaints that they receive, they are addressing issues that are currently identified in state code, and that animals have to have proper food, shelter, and water. So that will still continue. It's just that you can no longer keep your dog tethered in the backyard. And again, a total ban on tethering means that you can't tie your dog for short periods of time. It's not just for those who keep their dogs in the backyard permanently. This also affects those people who do short-term tethering, such as if your dog has to go out just for for short periods of times of exercise, etc. So it's a total ban on tethering, and
that's why we want to start talking about it now, is because we want to give people as much time as we can to start making other arrangements.
That's correct. And in our presentation yesterday at our afternoon session, we shared some other ways that citizens, if they decided not to tether, of course, putting up a fence is one way, but a fence can be costly. But certainly, depending upon what type of fence and the type of materials you use, will determine the cost of that. Boarding your animal, at a kennel is one way. Doggy daycares. Indoor crates that are available for keeping your dog in a crate in the house, and then there are outside pens or runs or cages that you can use outside that are large enough, and you can buy them in various sizes that will allow your dog to be able to move back and forth, but yet restrict the dog so that he or she won't be able to leave the property. So we have about 6 months, so folks will have to start making plans to do some other things if they currently keep their dog tied in the backyard, and it's going to be a change. But we want to do as much as we can over the next 6 months to make sure, one, everybody knows that a ban on tethering will go into effect January 1, but also give people some options that they might want to consider if they currently tether their dog and they need to make other arrangements.
Okay. All right. Well, we're giving people some notice, and it is going to be a difficult issue for people, but I think the community very, very clearly said this is not good for animals. We want Hampton to be a place where we stand up for that, and where really the thinking is changing on this issue. I think people didn't worry about it years ago, but it's become more prevalent, and some people cited, the potential for fighting dogs and some other illegal activities. So.
Yeah. Well, I expect that as this new ordinance goes into effect, we'll probably get calls from other localities that might be considering, passing similar ordinances in their communities, and so hopefully we'll have something to share regarding how this has changed for the better. And again, we do know, and we've seen the pictures, we've seen the examples of dogs that live, the life of tethered, to trees and posts and backyards. And again, not all pet owners keep their dogs that way, but for those that do, this is going to be a major change. But I think, again, for the good, and so, some pets will, eventually enjoy living a better life than they do today as a result of this change.
Well, that sounds great. Is there anything else you want to add about this?
No, just that I think our citizens who currently are pet owners, and we know that we have more than 7,000 registered dog owners in the city, and probably a few more that might not be registered, and they should be. So
right. It's hard to not register your dog now that the automatic. If you're getting a rabies shot, your dog has to get registered. You've got that safety net now.
That's right, and we just want to make sure everybody is aware of the change, and that we can do anything that we can to help. Share with them, other resources that might be available to them, other options that might be available to them, to just make sure this transition from, tethering and dogs who are currently and permanently tethered in their backyard, this transition to no tethering will be a major adjustment. And so we can do what we can to help our citizens who are pet owners manage this change to the best of their ability. So we're available. Feel free to contact our 311 center at 727-8311 for more information on it, or contact our animal control department, and they're more than happy to provide information on it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming by and explaining this today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching Round Robin.